Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are looking at the gun shield special rule, what this upgrade does on traditional field artillery, and whether or not you should take it. Now, this is strange coming from me as to what the take is going to be, because for everybody who's been following this channel, or if you've seen the intro video for the channel, you know that I really love traditional field artillery, and traditional field artillery is primarily the reason why I picked up bolt action in the first place. And I especially love the ones with the gun shields on them because they look awesome. And if I was designing a piece of technology in the, in the era of World War I, World War II, during that whole time in the early 20th century, the gun shield is exactly the thing that I would include, because even if this was on a howitzer that was not designed for close range fighting, if I'm going to train artillerists to be able to operate a piece of very complicated machinery, the last thing I want is one of them getting hit by something that falls astray, right? I want them to be safe. And so because of that, I think the gun shield is a really cool item and a really cool object. And in second edition, I loved the special rule. It was one of my favorite special rules for reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later. But in this edition, I'm really sorry to say it, especially for everybody else who, like me, really enjoys field howitzers, which took a nosedive this edition by comparison to other things. The gun shield upgrade in this edition, I don't think it's very good. It does have some niche applicabilities, which we'll talk about. It has been useful to me in a couple of situations. It did help save my bacon in one tournament game. But in general, I'm not a big fan of the gun shield, as we'll see in a little bit. Okay, so to start off with, from a thematic standpoint, thematically, we're talking about a protective shield that's attached to a field gun in order to help provide protection to the crew. Now, obviously, it's only going to be protection to the crew from a specific angle, right? Because it's not a dome. It does not go all the way around the troops. It certainly doesn't cover over them. They were often, as you'll see, in fact, here, I'll just go back to this picture of this British 25 pounder. They were often curved a bit. So that way there was a little bit of extra chances it might be able to glance something. There was a little bit of extra protection. It wasn't always flat. But in general, again, they're only really protecting you to the front. And the way that they do this, and you see this on page 126 of the core rulebook, basically the crew counts as being in soft cover from small arms fire that comes from models within the front arc of the gun. Okay. Now notice how many criteria there is in order to trigger this thing, right? So, it has to be small arms fire. So heavy weapons don't count. Close quarters attacks don't count. And in addition to that, if there were attacks that ignore cover saves, they would also ignore this, although admittedly, the attacks that tend to ignore cover saves also tend to be heavy weapons like flamethrowers and high explosive weaponry, firing indirect fire and things like that. So in general, it is nice that they have a caveat that just says and attacks that ignore cover saves that also ignore cover saves, even though in general they, like, practically speaking, it's all the same stuff. It's still heavy weapons and close quarters attacks. Okay. The result is that you pay an extra 5 points. It doesn't matter on veterancy. It could be an inexperienced field gun. It could be a regular or veteran field gun. It's always going to be 5 points, which is also more or less on par with adding extra crew to a gun. In as much as nations get the ability to add extra crewmen, you're basically paying to add an extra crewman, and that crewman is basically giving you a 5+ cover save from the front against small arms. Okay. Now, how does this compare between second edition and third edition? In second edition, crews, like, for example, that Hungarian light AT gun over there on the right-hand side, instead of getting the benefit of soft cover because they didn't do cover saves, and instead of giving, like, say, a penalty to hit, which is what cover was mostly doing last edition, instead, it just gave a +1 to the wound difficulty of the crew from the front arc. Which, on the one hand, it's not, like, the most incredible thing. But when you saw it from the perspective that I saw it, which was, I'm going to buy this crew at regular, but they're going to be wounding me from the front as if I were veterans. But I'm going to save myself, like, typically around 20 to 25 points. It could be as small as 15, depending on what kind of gun you're looking at. But oftentimes it's close to 20 to 25 points on the final cost of the item. And you're being treated basically the same. Obviously, morale is not the same as if you purchase them veteran. But from a wounding perspective, it was really nice, right? And seeing as there was also the potential for, if you were deployed, say, like, in a bunker or behind a stone wall or something else like that, that would give you that heavy cover +1 difficulty to wound that you had from entrenched positions in second edition, it was not unheard of that you could see a regular artillery crew that was wounded on 6s. Okay. Now, admittedly, again, small arms fire. So, if you did end up shooting at them with, say, autocannon fire or any sort of high explosive damage sort of thing, which is the way that you mostly dealt with artillery teams in second edition, they weren't getting the benefit of any of this, right? So because of that, it was 6 of one, half dozen of another. But I found I really liked it, and it was quite useful for maintaining that 3-man, 4-man, sometimes 5-man, and in a few cases larger than that, as we'll see later, crews did survive a good bit longer. In third edition, we replaced that bonus for the exact same cost. It's still 5 points, okay, per field gun that you want to purchase this thing on. Instead, you get the soft cover bonus to the front arc, which is a 5+ save. And so now let's look mathematically at what that actually looks like. Okay, so what this means is if you have a crew size of 3, normally you would need to do 3 wounds to the crew or 2 wounds and panic the crew or whatever in order to remove them. If we assume that all 3 of these guys are potentially suffering wounds and we have a chance to get a 5+ save, in order to remove the entire crew, you don't actually have to do 3 wounds to them, you have to do 4 wounds to them. Okay? And if that crew was instead getting a heavy cover save of a 4+ save, you would need to do either 4 or 5 wounds to that squad. Okay? Which means, and this is the interesting thing about it, for a 3-man crew, the difference between soft cover and heavy cover, it does matter, but it doesn't matter by all that much. In general, if you're suffering 4 wounds, you're probably gone. Okay? That's just the way that it's probably going to work out, because even if you save 2 of those wounds and then you suffer 2 more, and so you have to suffer the equivalent of 5, you're still performing a morale test, and there's a chance that the guy's just going to panic off, right? And so because of that, realistically, a 3-man crew is kind of looking basically just the same. The problem is the disparity between a 5+ save and a 4+ save when you start getting higher than 3-man crews. When you start taking medium howitzers, heavy howitzers, things like the Flak 88 over there on the right-hand side, or even just up-gunned, up-crewed Japanese units, because, for example, they have light howitzers that can get up to 5 men instead of 3 men, which is a really nice objective holding unit, because you're only paying like an extra 10 points, but now it's basically sitting on something like a full-fledged rifle squad, except that it's got a really big heavy weapon attached to it, which is really, really good. Instead of getting around 5 to 6 wounds, maybe up to 7, you're getting 7, maybe even 8 wounds that you have to do in order to remove that crew of 5 men, right? And by the time you get up to an 8-man crew, which is pretty much just the Japanese medium howitzer, the 105mm howitzer, with all the extra crewmen that you can tack onto that thing, it's pretty crazy, actually. You can get up to like 8 dudes. Those larger crews of Japanese howitzers, you might have to do 12 wounds to them if they're in a 4+ cover save, 10, maybe close to 11 if it's a 5+ save. Okay. And so this begs a question, especially since, again, since this is only to the front arc, like, why wouldn't you just deploy in heavy cover instead, right? If I'm gonna be thinking, well, I want protection from my forward arc, why wouldn't I just deploy them behind a stone wall? So the forward arc is protecting is still being protected with a heavy cover save. But in addition to that, and this is also really nice, that stone wall might wrap, which means I might actually get protection beyond my forward arc. Okay. And if that's the case, since I can potentially get that for free, why am I paying an extra 5 points for something that in that particular situation, the gun shield actually does nothing? Furthermore, I get the heavy cover save from my terrain feature against small arms, against direct fire high explosive damage, and against any other form of, especially direct fire, heavy weapon shots, right? If someone decides to shoot a bazooka at me and I'm not in a building, so they're not using high explosive damage, they're instead using just a normal hit, a heavy cover save will give me a save. I will get no save at all if I'm using a gun shield, right? So it's arc dependent, it's weapon dependent, it's board dependent, right? And this is an important thing to remember. There is a niche situation where the gun shield giving you soft cover is quite nice. And that is if, for example, this Flak 88 crew is on a board that has a limited amount of terrain. If it is a very lightly covered board, and you have other things like, say, a transport full of very important men, or a much more fragile medium mortar team, or something like that, that needs to be able to take advantage of the cover better, and due to the fact that units have to be beyond an inch of each other, you may not have the ability to put the Flak 88 behind a piece of cover or terrain that will actually give it a save, you might look at this and say, well, it has 7 men and the medium mortar has 3 men, which means the flak 88, especially if they're getting that 5+ save, we can probably absorb about 9 wounds. Possibly if we're rolling hot, we might even get close to 10. Whereas the medium mortar team is going to absorb 2, maybe 3, and then they're gone. And so I'm going to leave this one, this big flak 88 in the open. I'm going to try to turn it so that way that gun shield is nicely positioned. So it's going to be doing the job of protecting the men as much as we can. We're just going to hope people don't get around us. But the result is at least we would have a save. And that is fair. I'm not here to dispute that. However, I don't think that's a very good rule. Okay. And furthermore, it causes a historical problem because the overwhelming majority of gun shielded artillery pieces were not fielded in the open. They were anti-tank guns that were given cover and camouflage, prepared alongside a road or some other critical juncture where you know the enemy was going to go, or they were positioned in a trench line as protection against enemy tanks that might try to push the trench line. They were in another form of cover. And right now, there's no way to take advantage of that. I understand the desire not to change the wound difficulty because, again, it's the complicated side of math that 3rd edition is trying to remove. Though apparently, well, I guess we'll see what the new book says, but Soviet body armor still does that. But, here we are. But here's my recommendation on how I would change it. I would allow it to grant soft cover if there is no save, or a +1 to an existing save. Okay. It's worded very similar to the down rule, though down still adds on to this. Okay. Of course, admittedly, from experience, if you're fielding artillery, the last order you want to be giving an artillery crew is the down order. Okay. You really don't want to be giving them the down order. You want them to be firing. If you have to rally, fine. But down is not the kind of rule you want to be giving because it's so hard already to make back your value on a field gun. You really don't want to lose an entire turn of shooting just because you had to go down. Okay. Which means there's a fun trade-off there. And that's a healthy thing from a game balance perspective, right? Where if you really want the crew to be alive, you could put this thing in a forest, which was a very common place to place field guns of this kind. And, these French guys over here would be sitting on a 5+ save, becomes a 4+ save to the front. Because they've got that gun shield. And so now they're being treated as if they're in heavy cover, which is a perfectly fine save. Obviously, it might be better if you were in heavy cover going from a 4+ to a 3+. But, again, depending on what your army looks like, you might not have a lot of choices. Depending on what the board looks like, you might not have a lot of choices. You got to protect what needs to be protected, right? And you got to keep them safe. The fact that this guy gets a slightly better save than normal is always really good. And if you really wanted to go down, they could go down for a 2+ save to the front to become a 3+ save to the sides, or a 5+ save if they're within point blank range to the sides or rear. And of course, no save if it's indirect fire HE, because then there's just no saves, right? And so because I think that would be helpful. Also, you got to be careful of when +1s can stack. But as far as I know, we don't have any artillery that have the infiltrator special rule. If you could get artillery with the infiltrator special rule, that would allow you potentially get a pretty sick cover save bonus to the front arc, right? I mean, just as long as you don't have a run or advance order, which with artillery, you'd really prefer not to be giving those orders anyway if you can really avoid it, right? You just want to be able to sit there and shoot in your forward arc all the time. But if that was the case, if you were starting in heavy cover, you could go to 4+, becomes a 3+ from being an infiltrator, becomes a 2+ to the front because you have a gun shield. I will admit that would be probably an abuse of the cover save rule, although admittedly, walk a couple inches to the side, shoot at it from the side arc, and now you're back down to a 3+, and that's going to be the same as any infiltrator that's in heavy cover. So, again, I don't think it's particularly horrible. I don't think it's that bad. But, again, we don't have any of these yet, right? Maybe partisans will get it. I could see the Japanese potentially getting this, since a lot of their AT guns especially were kind of pre-positioned, ready for people to come to the islands. A lot of their artillery pre-positioned, kind of ready to go. And so I kind of like this idea of forward deployed, ready in ambush sort of things. I think that would be kind of fun. But just suffice it to say, it is, at least at present, pretty hard to abuse this. And even if they did, it just means maneuver warfare. It's still arc dependent, right? Maneuvering around negates the bonus, and that's exactly how it should be. That's the kind of gameplay that we want. We want it to be the kind of game where by maneuvering and moving around, you increase your odds. It rewards you for taking the risk of having to move out of your defensible position. But I think if something like this happened, first of all, I still feel like this would be a 5+, a plus 5 point bonus. I don't feel like we need to add or increase the cost of anything that has a gun shield for this. Again, the overwhelming majority of units are not actually using the benefit of a gun shield that they're paying for. And this would allow it to at least have something useful that it does for you. It would make it a little more flexible in your force, and that might cause us to see a little more artillery fielded on the table, which I think is healthy for the game. I don't want the game to stagnate, and I don't want people to get bored of it because everybody's always running, big veteran infantry sections supported by tanks, for example. But what do you think? Do you think that this is too powerful? Do you think that this is, Centaur just showing that he loves artillery perhaps a little too much, and then the big field guns are what he actually enjoys playing with, and so maybe he's a little too biased and maybe shouldn't make decisions for all the rest of us? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.